that we need to talk about. I would start with, hello? Okay. Hello? Okay. Okay, I will just quickly look at what we have to discuss, and please, we're going to let each and every one of us see what we have. I'll quickly start with Chief, sir. Hello, Chief. Chief, that is not a place.
Thank you, Emily. I'd like to present a few of my thoughts on the subject matter today. The subject matter for discussion today is building a sustainable future, COVID-19 era. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, please.
Hello?
Yes, we can. Well, I can.
Okay, excellent. I shall presume everybody else can as well. COVID-19, surprisingly, was described over the last few months as an existential threat to our planet. Previously, the only recent references to an existential threat actually were used to describe climate change. An existential threat is actually an activity or time in one's life where you reconsider the meaning of life and question your existence. In short, you turn to God. So there's a strong link between the way the planet has looked at COVID-19 and its impacts on us, and the way climate change has also been examined. Although the strength of the examination of climate change is worldwide, it is still not strong enough. The world is now looking at COVID-19, the impacts on the economy, and putting climate change in there as a distant third. During the period of lockdown, one of the significant impacts on the world was because the world was locked down from Russia to the United States to Australia to Africa, Nigeria, everywhere. One of the important changes was that people were forced to stay at home or persuaded to stay at home, and it meant that they focused their attention on things that were real, things that were more important to them. So, you know, people spent their time with family. They were closeted up with family, so they had to, but it also increased the family bonds. It also increased the bonds with friends. And it also increased, surprisingly, the bonds with nature, as people learned to appreciate nature all over again. The fringe benefit of the lockdown was that factories were closed, production was down worldwide, and therefore consumption of fuels, fossil fuels, was also reduced. And that has meant that there's a reduction in carbon emissions and a measurable reduction in the destruction of the ozone layer, which has a significant impact on climate change, as you all know. Also added to that was the benefit of, a slight benefit, I should say, a regeneration of our flora and fauna, as in most environments, the population stayed away from our forests and our natural reserves. There's a prediction that COVID-19 or similar pandemics will be the way of life of the future. And I have to ask, is this a good thing for man and our planet? In short, will the lessons learned and the fringe benefits of COVID-19 lead to a more sustainable development. What is sustainable development? Sustainable development is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. To achieve this, actually, there's a need to integrate, therefore, the economic, social, and environmental objectives of society to maximize human well-being. Very often in the need for development, that environmental third leg is left off. And as we advance into a post-COVID era, I think it's important that the environment is put firmly back on the table. The path for sustainable development, I should say, is not a new. It's not a new thought. In 2015, the United Nations coined the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, which all members of the United Nations have adopted. And I'd like to draw the attention of this webinar to just 5 of them. SDG 17 that talks about, SDG 7 that talks about affordable and clean energy. SDG 12 that talks about responsible consumption and production. SDG 13 that looks at climate action. 14 that looks at life below water. And 15 that looks at life on land. In short, the route to sustainable development in a post-COVID-19 era is linked to the world not just adopting these 17 SDGs, in particular the 5 I mentioned, but also for a more strict implementation of the SDGs to speed up the action the various countries have done so as we achieve the SDGs well before the year 2030 when it was planned. I think I'll stop my comments there for now, not to overtake the lead presenter.
Thank you so much for introducing the discussion for today. Thank you. That was very apt. I want to introduce the lead presenter for today, and he's the person of Ibrahim Salau. Please, can we have you, sir? Welcome. Please take the floor.
Thank you very much. It gives me great pleasure to be here, and I thank the NES for the opportunity of this webinar. I also want to thank Dr. Dafinone for that brilliant background on sustainable development, because I'll just try to take it from there. He did brilliantly, giving us historical background to sustainable development and what that means in terms of the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. So what I would therefore do is just to look at environmental impact assessment and banks and how that ties into the overall objectives of sustainable development and the SDGs. But before I do that, like Dr. Dafinone mentioned, the SDGs were, came into being in 2015. Before then, in 1992, the UN had the Earth Summit, and that gave birth to what is known as Agenda 21, which was the first global framework for achieving sustainable development globally. So Agenda 21 was made up of a number of principles, and which at the Earth Summit, there was consensus that these principles would guide the attainment of sustainable development globally. So Principle 17 of Agenda 21 actually recommends environmental impact assessment as a tool that can also help us achieve sustainable development. So that was the first formal global recognition of environmental impact assessment as a tool for achieving sustainable development. But environmental impact assessment on its own actually was first used in the US in the 60s, but the first legalization of that was in the form of the NEPA Act of 1969 in the US, which came into being on January 1st, 1970. That was the first legal EIA legal framework that the world would see. But in Nigeria, what we did was that the advent of the cocoa toxic waste dump led to a plethora of different environmental regulations in Nigeria, and which also led to the enactment of, well, not enactment, the formulation of the National Policy on Environment in Nigeria. This was in 1989. And then also, shortly after the Earth Summit in 1992, we had the Nigerian EIA Act, which is the Environmental Impact Assessment then Decree number 86 of 1992, which is now known as the EIA Act Cap E12 LFN 2004. So that's the legal perspective for EIAs globally and then in Nigeria. But it's good to but in a broader sense, what we call an EIA is just a systematic way of evaluating the potential adverse and, of course, beneficial environmental and social impacts of a proposed development or activity. This definition was provided by the EU in 2004. But what's important is that over the years, environmental impact assessment adoption in Nigeria, in addition to the EIA Act, which came into being in 1992, the adoption has also been influenced, especially in the financial sector. It's been influenced by DFI, Development Financial Institutions, such as the World Bank and the IFC. So, because when banks want to access funds from these DFIs, they then are required to comply with a number of environmental and social guidelines, including EIA. And then in 2012, we had the Nigerian Sustainable Banking Principles, which also is more aligned to the DFI EIA requirements. And so also it forms a framework that drives the adoption of environmental impact assessment by financial sector players. So the summary of all of this is that clearly EIA is a decision support tool for achieving development. But the question is, how does bank come in? How do banks come in, and what's their relationship in terms of the project financing? The starting point would be the recognition that EIA is a project-focused decision support tool. And so beyond that, Banks basically want to make money. They want to make good returns on their investment. But the idea of sustainable development, just like Chief Dafinone brilliantly proceeded, is about making money, that is achieving economic development, and also doing that in a way that we can take care of our needs today, and the future generations can take care of their needs. That's the essence of sustainable development. And this is where banks do come in. The way that I would round up my introductory remarks is to say, how can banks to ask how can banks contribute to sustainable development through EIAs? And my response is that banks can do this by speaking the language of sustainable development that we speak today, the 21st century language of sustainable development. This 21st century language of sustainable development is about gender equity, it's about biodiversity conservation, it's about human rights protection, it's about resource conservation, it's about climate risk mitigation and adoption, and it's about the adoption of renewable energy technologies. So banks, in addition to making money, should contribute to sustainable development by ensuring that the projects that they fund address these elements of 21st century sustainable development. And when I come back, I would talk about a few ideas on how can better do this, and in that process, achieve better project funding outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ibrahim Salau, for that excellent introductory remarks. That was quite loaded. And you just actually made a summary of our discussion today. Thank you so much. I got some few, what's it called, takes from what you just said. But I know the audience will be also willing, waiting eagerly to make one or two remarks. Please send your comments through the comment portal. The organizers will take it up from there, and they would ask the panelists whatever concerns that you have. Thank you very much. We're going to ask, thank you so much, Ibrahim Salau, once more for that excellent delivery. And I'm very proud and happy to hear you speak. Ibrahim Salau was the lead speaker, and he has actually given us a lot of insight on how banking affects what's called EIA for sustainable development. Thank you so much. Thank you. We're going to invite Professor Ezemoye to please come on board and tell us what he has on this great topic of ours. Prof, please. Is Prof there? Hello, Prof.
Yeah.
Okay, Prof, please. You have the floor. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I just started by aligning myself with the National President of the Nigerian Environmental Society for providing this platform, which is for topical issues and of human demand at this moment. Incidentally, I'm not an interloper. I also want to align myself with the Nigerian Environmental Society. I'm a fellow of the society and leading as National President. That understands why I'm giving this solidarity kudos to my National President. Having said that, I want to say that I'm even delighted and honored to be in this group, to be a panelist with this very solid and educated panelists. Dr. Dafinone provided the background. I'm so happy he did that, because that has accelerated me from a reputation. Ibrahim Salau just hit the nail on the head, and I'm happy to join at this point. Environmental sustainability and our quest to build a sustainable future is paramount in this present day. COVID-19 era, present and past, we will not change the need for an intervention. There is a solid need for intervention, the protection of the Nigerian environment. One of such reasons is that there is an mitigated assault currently ravaging the environment. And the consequences of these unmitigated assault also led social, economic, societal, and even health problems for which COVID-19 is one of them. You probably want to know, I would like to address some of the relevant components of these assaults on the environment. One of them is inevitable, input, and that's overpopulation. The current population rise depends on the same natural capital. It's where 70% of the rural inhabitants depend on nature, subsistence. You can be sure that ravaging of the environment will remain a consistent factor in the Nigerian population. Dependence on natural gas or carbon resources, dependent on the natural resources, which I just mentioned, for regulations as it may be, for compliance and enforcement, have all contributed to this assault. And what is the evidence? That for this assault to be mitigated or stopped or controlled, there must be a formidable intervention. This is where the topic of this webinar becomes very, very relevant. Environmental impact assessment, banks achieving better project financing opportunities. EIA, the briefs, the historical background has been provided. It's an intervention, not just because they were endorsed by conventions of countries, not just because treaties of all sorts have been documented. It is because that EIA is, as a matter of fact, a point of necessity. Because its essential component is to protect the environment. But it's taking cognizance of the fact that in the course of protecting the environment, the well-being of the people must also be maintained through development. So these two concepts, this two conceptual framework is summed up in the paradigm, which is sustainable development. The development must continue. But in the course of development, you must make sure that you protect the environment. One key mantra that comes out from this combination of technology is the need for intergenerational equity. In other words, once you are enjoying nature today, please ensure that the future generations share the same amount of enjoyment. EIA in the Nigerian context, I would like to zero down. It's an international project, but in the Nigerian context, it started, not only has it started, it's now a mandatory process. But the extent to which it has been practiced, still questionable. Probably take that as the second comment. Sustainable development is a mandatory requirement as a nature because it provides room for sustainability. It's also important to clear the technology sustainability, which can be seen as longevity, but the ability to survive under counteracting pressures. You raise your head above board. That's the concept of sustainability. And sustainability is again driven by intervention. Here, EIA becomes a key factor. Projects must go on. Funding is a very important instrument for compliance and enforcement. But see who pays the piper, also the payment. If funding must come from banks, and if funding must support green growth, if funding must support green economy, therefore implies that funding for green projects is specific and must also be given to them. And this brings me to the concept of green financing. Green financing has started in Nigeria, I'm sure Salu, you talk about it. It has started in Nigeria, and it is financing project. It's a financing project concept that is stipulated for projects that are green in nature. Renewables are one of them. Efficiency, energy efficiency is one of them. Waste management is one of them. Agroforestry is one of them. But these projects have to be under strict regulation. Green financing, it has taken the standard stage in Nigeria. From the current report, Nigeria is the third preferred OECD country for financing of green projects after Kenya and Ethiopia. That's a plus for us. And that's something we must encourage. That is a major intervention if sustainability, Nigerian environment, human society should also be contained. I must say that apart from the Nigerian scenario, green financing initiative was launched in 2016 in London. Out of the 1,874 signatories, we are amazed to know that only 123 signed and agreed for responsible financing. That will not deter us. All I need to say at this point is that green financing, banking support for green projects is a mandatory intervention which is required at this point in time. I know that to effectively carry out green financing of green projects in this country for green growth and green economy, certain barriers will be expected, considering human nature. Certain barriers will also be expected considering institutional demand. But one thing we must also take cognizance of, that environmental due diligence, environmental risk rating is part of the sustainable future which we are thinking of after post-COVID-19. Post-COVID-19 will always be a mantra. But what is important in this context is what we do after post-COVID-19. It's only to build a sustainable future using the instruments of intervention, one which I've highlighted, environmental impact assessment, and insisting that banking and funding are provided for projects that are green in nature for green growth in our country. I'll stop at this point. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Prof, for that insight. And you actually touched some key aspects there. And one of the concerns you identified was overpopulation. And you also talked about EIA as a necessary tool for sustainable development, among others. I would discuss this in detail when we come back, but I would like to invite Dr. Desmond Majekudumi to also give us insight to today's topic. Doctor, please.
Yeah, hello. It's indeed a pleasure, an honor, and actually very, very encouraging to be part of this discussion and to see what's going on. Sustainable development. The fundamental reality is that the particular system of development, so-called development, that we as a species, the Homo sapiens, have embarked upon, particularly over the last 200 years since the advent of the fossil fuel-driven industrial revolution, which started with coal-fired steam engines in the United Kingdom and expanded very rapidly all over the world. It is not sustainable. It is not sustainable. And we need to make some very fundamental changes in the way we are developing. Again, I put that in parentheses. Because whilst some of the developments might appear to be quite good for people in terms of providing services and so on, if in the process of that development, you are destroying the very life support system that maintains life on this planet, then it is a misnomer to call it development. In fact, it's the opposite. And unfortunately, this is exactly what has been happening, as Chief Dafinoni so eloquently pointed out to us. The pandemic that we're facing is very unfortunate, but it is not nearly as unfortunate as what can happen just with the climate change problem alone. Not to mention if we add aquatic pollution, not to mention if we now add species extinction, which is proceeding at an unprecedented rate. On planet Earth, species have come and gone, but it's always been over a protracted time period, which allowed evolutionary processes to preserve remnants of those species or variations of those species. The way we're driving species into extinction now is unprecedented, far too fast, and accumulated. It is threatening our very life support system. This is why the International Panel for Climate Change, the World Meteorological Organization, and several other highly enlightened organizations have warned us, like they did post COVID pandemic, 8 years before COVID, we were warned that we shall unleash a zoonotic pandemic. If we didn't rapidly adjust our activities, we didn't adjust, pandemic was released. Thank God it's a fairly benign pandemic, even though it's very voracious, the fatality rates are fairly low. But we've also been warned about reaching certain tipping points very soon, in the next 12 years. If we continue just the CO2 pollution in the atmosphere alone, if we continue that alone, not even looking at the species extinction and aquatic pollutions and so on, just the CO2 pollution alone, which has now peaked at the highest level recorded in hundreds and hundreds of thousands of years. It's over 400 parts per million. And that's taken it from 280 ppm pre-industrial time to now 400 parts per million. It's never been this high. And what is worrisome is that the world got together in 2015 and agreed, we're going to reduce the carbon pollution. We're not going to allow CO2 levels to go too high. We're not going to allow global warming to go beyond 1.5 degrees. So in a nutshell, it's time for a very, very dramatic, drastic rethink on how we can operate our businesses sustainably. And I know that there's enough people just in the NES alone, let alone people in this panel, who have the intellectual capacity to do this. What is required, I think, is the understanding of the urgency and the severity of the problem facing us. I rest my case.
Thank you so much, Doctor. Doctor actually spoke on green projects and also talked about how we need to talked about we need to have a rethink on how we manage sustainable development. You touched a lot of things, but I will just introduce Dr. Bassi and we'll come back to you later on. Dr. Bassi, please. Okay, Dr. Bassi there, please. Okay, I will just quickly look at some of the key aspects while we try to bring Dr. Bassi in. We'll look at some key aspects that you talked about, and I'm very, very glad. I thank you for reminding us of our responsibilities for those of us that are in the industry, and I also thank you for the confidence you have in the panel this today that we have, that they can actually do justice to some of these burning issues that you have presented. You looked at a lot of, you talked on a lot of things, and I know, please, Dr. Bassi, please, once you are in, just let me know so that we can have you. Okay. All right. We're just waiting for the sorry, Dr. Bassi to come on board. You talked about climate change problem. You talked about species extinctions, among others. So if Dr. Bassi is not ready, please, those at the back end, can you please tell me why we can't have her on, please? Can someone please tell me why we can't have her on? If we can we proceed to the next item, or we wait for her to come, please? I just want to know, did she mute her mic?
Right, yes, so she has to unmute herself by herself. So this is
okay. What is it?
Unless I would kick her out of the meeting, then she can join, and she will join with her audio.
All right,
Yeah.
that would be fine. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the support. Thank you. Yes, thank God. Thank God. Yes. Thank you very much. Please, Dr. Bassi, can you please speak to some of those issues that we discussed today and much more, ma'am?
Thank you so very much, Emily. Thank you. And once again, I'd like to say a very big thank you to all our discussants. And yes, indeed, everybody has touched on several things that going forward we need to pay attention to. My perspectives will essentially be in three areas. One would be the EIA. Do we have regulations? Do we have enough? Are they adequate? Do they benchmark with what happens globally? And if I have to answer those questions, and please join me in answering those questions. Do we have regulations? Do we have tools that can help us live in a sustainable way? Sustainability means continuity. It means doing things that will benefit generations yet unborn. It means having processes and systems that can be measured, following the laid down standards for improvement or for retooling. That is to say, you want to go back to the drawing board and see where you can now make things better. But what has happened in Nigeria oftentimes is the EIA process is taken as a permit requirement. And what do I mean by that? You go out, you do the EIA, which is a requirement to enable us identify the risk involved in those projects, because we must develop. We will not say because there's climate change now there will be no development in the developing countries. However, are we going to commit the same or go through the same mistakes others have done before us? But coming again to the EIA back home here, we carry out those EIA projects, and once we get the permits, we put them on the shelf. No monitoring, so we don't know whether the identified risks are there. Are they increasing? Are our systems mitigating as we say we're going to mitigate? So these are things going forward, we really need to pay attention to. Coming from where I worked some years back, EIA has been enforced in the oil and gas industry. In the other sectors, what is happening, please? Every activity impacts on the environment. The level of impact is just different. So I'm calling on all of us right now to please ensure with your networks, wherever you are, whatever business you're doing. Chief Ede, I know you're in the banking sector. The banks think they do not impact the environment. I think they do. So in every sector, there must be the same process. I know oil and gas is an international business, is highly regulated, and it's also very much in the face of everyone. But every other sector needs to follow through that same process. That is, if indeed we are serious about sustainability. The other thing I would like to talk about are the agencies. You have regulations because you need regulations to have a level playing field for everyone. What are the oversight agencies doing? Are they speaking with one another? Are they engaging with the people, the communities, the host communities who will be most impacted by these projects? Are they making, at the communities, at community level, do they understand the implications of this project so that they can help in making sure that things are done right? Not in my backyard. Nobody wants, like I said some time ago, most people have the generators by their windows. If you do know that the fumes coming from the generators will hurt you, would you put your generator by your window? Absolutely not. So yes, indeed, we have all these tools, we have all the policies and all of that, but the average man knows nothing about it. And that is where the NES comes in. We need to reach out to more people. Like Dr. Desmond said, yes, indeed, we have all spoken very, very well, or we are all discussing at this level, high level. But when we go down, further down the chain, are they aware at all that these laws exist? Do they understand the intent? And what is their role? Because when you look again at the agencies, no agency has everything in terms of resources or even the personnel. So what are the things we should be looking at to fill that gap? This is another area that I think calls for attention. The academia carry out studies. The students carry out several. You need to attend the conferences across Nigeria. So many universities. What are we doing with the data? It's one thing to have data. It's another thing for the data to help us. What are we actually doing with the data? Are we exchanging information that will help us? Are we analyzing the data? And before we even go further, can the data stand the test of time? Recently, I visited Sophie Park, and I was amazed. That is an eco garden. Go to Okada, Nigerian University. That is an eco city on its own. Meanwhile, Nigerians spend millions and millions of dollars traveling out and abroad, going to environments that we can very easily replicate here in Nigeria. I'm very, very emotional when I talk about some of these things. So I will try to maybe now calm down or perhaps stop here. But I am so happy. I'm really, really so delighted that across sectors, across disciplines, we're having this discussions. And I really urge the participants, please ask your questions. The experts are here. Ask your questions, because what we want to do as a society is to make that word sustainability no longer abstract. We want everybody to take a second look at the way they live. Because if we wait for government will not do everything. It is us, the people. It is us, it is our life, it is our environment. We need to own it. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Ma. Dr. Bassey, that was loaded. I wasn't surprised that actually came from you, because charity does begin at home. So you hit the nail, or you hit hard on some sectors, and I just want to quickly talk about it. Ms. Bassey, Dr. Bassey reminded us of the need to ensure that sustainable development is not just only being talked about, but we should be able to implement what we talk about. That is our time we started doing things differently. And she also talked about data analysis. She also talked about the environmental action plan following the approval of the EIA. What do we do with the result? What do we do with the mitigation measures that are being fulfilled? I will stop here, ma'am, so that I would allow others to react. I don't know if any of the panelists has any other thing to say, or it is open for me to ask one or two questions based on what you presented, or you have the lead speaker, sir, Ibrahim Salahu. Please, do you want to speak on anything, or Because you said you will come back. You promised coming back. So can we have it, please?
Okay. Thank you very much, Emily. Yeah, the second part of my presentation actually resonates a lot with what Dr. Dorothy Bassi mentioned, which is to take sustainable development from the realm of abstract and then look at it from the perspective of action. And particularly with respect to banks. So that's what I want to do for the next few minutes. But I like to start that by relating that to the COVID era. Typically, in terms of environmental and social risks that banks face, there are three categories. One of them is credit risk, the second is liability risk, and then the third is reputational risk. This risk can arise from projects that banks fund if environmental and social issues have not been properly considered. And all of these risks come together to affect a bank's bottom line. So that's one basket. The second basket is that in the COVID era, the COVID situation significantly escalates all of these three risks because now there's a lot of pressure from everywhere. And so banks' clients' cash flows are strained. So the COVID era puts a lot of additional pressure on these three risks. So all of this speaks to resilience of banks and how attending to E&S risks can help them. So the way that it can help them is to help boost a bank's resilience. How? Access to investor funds. If there's a lot of funds out there right now, and if a bank has been paying attention to environmental and social issues, it becomes better. The accessibility to these funds, especially from DFIs like IFC, World Bank, CDC, and the like, the access to these funds becomes easier. Secondly, a bank is able to build better stakeholder trust, which will help its resilience. Like subcontractors, for example, if you have paid attention to workers' welfare and then now you need to disengage, they are more able to listen to you and trust you because pre-COVID, you already cared. Thirdly, increased operational efficiency and cost savings. And finally is the enhancement of corporate resilience, which kind of summarizes it. So that's the first part. The second part is, in practical terms, I mean, previous speakers have all noted the very important point that we need to attend to issues of sustainable development to even give ourselves, not to talk of future generations, a chance of survival. Dr. Madia Kudumi said that the world would reach its tipping point in just 12 years. So that's how in terms of action, that's the first agreement. So the second agreement is for banks to achieve better project financing outcomes. Well, a primary outcome is to make money, but a better outcome is to make money and also do that in a sustainable manner. Do that while speaking the language of 21st century sustainable development, like I mentioned. Mm-hmm. And using the platform of the EIA as a project decision support tool. How can banks do this? The first thing is for banks to drive a stakeholder-wide understanding of the role of EIAs in achieving better project outcomes. Banks should look at their entire value chain, and then starting with internal. I'll give you an example. A credit officer or a business development officer in a bank wants to close the deal. She doesn't understand. Most would not understand that, okay, yeah, there's a requirement for an EIA. Why is that? What is the reason behind the requirement? It is the understanding of the reason, the role that EIAs can play that would help the way that the credit officer relates with the client in terms of the requirement for that EIA report. And then so if a bank drives stakeholder-wide understanding of the role of EIAs in achieving better project outcomes, that would help that bank's adoption of EIA and then its contribution to sustainable development. The second thing is to encourage and support project developers to commence the EIA studies very early in the project development process. We are not going to achieve the objective of EIA studies in terms of maximizing the contribution of that project to sustainable development if that EIA study is conducted when the project is already commissioned. The benefits of EIA studies are better maximized when they are started early on in the project development process, because since they are a sustainable development decision support tool, you have the opportunity to conduct all your initial analysis to ensure that while you are developing that project, then you have made the best decision in terms of achieving your economic projections and also attending to social and environmental issues. So starting that EIA study very early on in the project development process will help a great deal. The third thing is for banks to develop capacity internally and externally. If you have the understanding that EIAs would help achieve better project funding outcomes, then you should have that capacity. It is the capacity that will drive understanding, and it is that capacity that would help that the intended outcomes are achieved. You could have experts internally, but where you don't have experts, then you could relate with external support in terms of consultants. And number 4 is for them to make inputs into the EIA report preparation early on again. And let me put that in practical terms. Because a lot of banks are in a hurry to close deals, they just accept the report and then close the deal, and thereby losing that opportunity to contribute to sustainable development through that EIA study. You shouldn't be in such a hurry to close the deal without making inputs into the terms of reference of the EIA study, because that's what's going to form how the EIA study would be conducted. So when you are funding a project and then your project developer wants to conduct an EIA study, the bank should ask for the terms of reference of the EIA study to ensure that the issues, that elements of 21st century sustainable development language are addressed: gender equality, biodiversity conservation, human rights protection, resource conservation, climate risk mitigation, and adaptation, and then adoption of renewable energy technologies. When you ask for the terms of reference and then you make sure that these issues will be addressed in the EIA study, then you are making that contribution. You are enhancing the chances of achieving that sustainable development outcome through that project that you are financing. Finally, is for banks to pay attention to beyond EIA approvals, just the pyramid. What do I mean? In the Nigerian EIA process, once you get the approval of the Federal Ministry of Environment, you receive the EIA permit in form of an EIS. These permits come with conditions that are largely, in most cases, largely ignored by banks. They just are in a hurry to close the deal and go on to the next deal. It's okay to be in a hurry, but we need to understand that these issues relate to our continued existence on Earth. The issues of sustainable development, it's about our continued existence on Earth. And there is no other place to go. As far as we know to date, there is no other that is as habitable as Earth. So one typical example is these EIA permits come with conditions such as for the project developers to sign MOUs with the host communities. So a bank has a role to play, to pay attention to that, to say, yes, you have given us the EIA permit, but this permit says that you need to sign a memorandum of understanding with the host community, and then in doing so, earn a social license to operate. Ensure that you relate with the host community in a way that is mutually beneficial and in a way that is sustainable. If so that's the last point I would make as far as the practical things that banks can do to contribute to the sustainable development of Nigeria through the EIA studies relating to the projects that they fund. It's a great opportunity, and I hope that they would realize its importance. It also holds tremendous opportunities for banks in terms of building, enhancing their resilience, especially resilience is, that's one of the things that businesses globally need most at this COVID era period. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ibrahim. I'd just like to quickly touch on something you mentioned, and I'll then give the floor for our participants to ask some questions. When you talk about the banks looking at the bottom line, yes, they are a profit-oriented enterprise or entity, just like every other business. However, the bottom line would certainly be affected if that project further down the line comes, faces some challenges they never envisage, and that is where the public hearing comes in, and that is where a thorough assessment of the risks involved comes to play. Because if they do not take time, oftentimes maybe we don't hear about it, but we have heard of projects that started off very, very well. A few years down the line, some issues come out of it, perhaps with communities, or indeed, if you go and put a project that is prone to flooding, for instance, you understand, and something goes wrong, your bottom line is compromised. And so for me, this is a message where we need to shout it at the rooftop. Yes, indeed, the processes have been made, ab initio, permits have been issued, but it is very, very important to work with experts to ensure the sustainability of that project, which in turn would also give you the bottom line you have calculated for that project. I will leave the floor for our participants to ask their questions, and hopefully we all will be able to give them answers. Thank you very much, Emily.
Yeah, thank you, Emily. I'm sorry to just jump in. I observed that this Babajide Alo has joined us. He's an erudite environmentalist and sustainable development expert. I'd just like to recognize his presence and to ask if he would like to make any contribution. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. I just wanted to sneak in as a listener before Engineer Salau suddenly spotted me and brought me on. The issue of AIA and banks is certainly important. And I just hope that all I can intervene here, that I hope that our banks and financial institutions have reached a point now where they would demand for EIAs before financing any project. I listened carefully to the excellent presentation of Salau, and he's touched on all the points. But what is important for NES to do now is how we can get the banks on board. I don't know whether we can do it through the Federal Ministry of Environment or is it through Central Bank to compel banks to demand for EIAs for all projects before they are financed. The same way the World Bank, the IFC will do for all projects. We do know that the World Bank, the FDB, the IFC will demand for, solid EIAs before they do. And we've taken them through this before. I recall that some 10, 15 years ago, the Financial Institutions Training Center brought me to come and talk to bank directors. They have an association with the Association of Bank Directors. And I spoke to them and brought out the importance of EIA for financing projects. That exercise, that intervention at that time, caused some banks to set up sustainable development desks. I don't know, I want to try and remember the names of the few banks that did set up sustainable development desks because of that. But the thing, I don't think they went far before, entrepreneurs found that completing IAs as another bureaucratic, cumbersome method, which ended up making the banks and financial institutions to relax that requirement. So the only intervention I can make is to say that following from this now, let us get the banks on board, because obviously better project output will come from EIAs, and that was what I said to the bank directors at the time when I was able to attend their meeting. I addressed them that indeed they will get more profits, more returns on the projects than if there was no EIA being done. Because for World Bank projects, for example, those of us who have been involved know that the projects get better. I can see that John Omuteka is in the room. John and I had to do AIAs for some World Bank projects, which were going to happen in Nigeria. And the projects got better because of the fact that we did project analysis that made the project much better. So that's what I would say at this juncture. Thank you for spotting me, Salau, and bringing me on. And congratulations on a very good presentation.
Thank you very much, sir. Emily.
Emily, can I come in now?
Yes, please. Yes, please.
Okay. I just want to follow up as I greet Professor Allah, our senior and our mentor. It's enough to get the banks on board. But again, the project developers must also be taught the rubrics of preparing projects that will not fail. Very, very important. They must know the green requirements of funding. But the narratives have changed, and that is part of what NES, I think we should also be thinking about doing, creating an avenue for training project developers to be trained to provide or to produce bankable feasibility projects that have green facilities in there. The other point I would like to mention, following up from our national president, is the issue of research, the contribution of research. There is a need for interconnectivity among the research and institutional players in the environment. I'll give you a typical example. I just examined a PhD project on acetaminophen, which is an off-cancer drug, which is discharged in the environment, and they find themselves into our water body. The levels, as I speak today, is so high, led to some secondary, problems with fish production. They are discharging. This is a contribution of research. Another PhD student that I've just examined, I just finished working on a hydrocarbon bacteria degrading software. But after degrading the bacteria, there is an adverse effect. It becomes an invasive species. These are not taken into consideration when they are accepted as institute for remediation. So research plays a very important role. And the third point I want to mention is approvals are also given to chemicals under the guise of the material safety data sheet. Those material data sheets approve limits for humans alone. But when they find themselves into the environment, they destroy both humans and organisms. So I think there is a need for interconnectivity between research and the implementation of EIA. One thing I must advocate at this point in time is there's a need for a review of some of our EIA practices and concepts. As we speak today, there is no inclusion of ecotoxicological considerations in any of our EIA protocols. And there is no way you can talk about remediation certification that ecotoxicological consideration. These are all the tools that we require for sustainability. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jeff Prof, for that feedback. I'm happy that you identify some gaps as per policies and concepts as regard ecotoxicity testing. Sorry, because of poor network, I could barely hear those concerns in terms of the material safety data sheet. I would like the Secretariat to please ensure that these comments are collated, and so that we come up with a strong communique or recommendation that will ensure that the relevant sector or those responsible parties that are responsible for this, these comments are sent to them for implementation or for consideration as the case may be. Thank you so much, Prof. I am happy that you came back to even bring that in. I want to welcome another professor in the house. Professor Allah, I welcome you. It's a great delight to have you, sir. Thank you so much, Prof. Each time you speak, we get enriched. Thank you, sir. We appreciate your presence and we appreciate the feedback that you just given to us, and also the step, because you identify some key areas too. But I just want to quickly recognize also Professor Onwucheka. Professor Onwucheka, please, can you just tell us one or two things within 3 minutes? Prof, you are welcome, sir.
Thank you, Emily. Thank you, Professor Alo. Thank you, Professor Zemoye. Thank you, the President. And thank you to all the speakers. What we're discussing is fundamental to the difference between private goods and public goods. The environment is public good, and no private investor will voluntarily invest in sustaining public good. The market drives what excludes stakeholders in the environment to consume environmental products. The markets are always regulated to do things. That's why when we sign agreements, treaties that are non-binding, the non-state actors, multinationals, and so on and so forth, are not forced to do those things. In fact, they find ways to outsmart every regulation. I think that in order for banks to achieve better project financing outcomes, we need to find a way to make their loans or their bottom line or environmental performance a financial risk. If that is not forced on them, it will still be voluntary. We will be begging them to do this. We will train them to do that. I think that environmental performance, environmental disclosure, and the bank's bottom line must be tied together. Where that is done, the banks will be forced to do what is necessary to make sure that their bottom line does not or is not affected by environmental performance. Yes, there are many rules and regulations and procedures that have been brought into all kinds of things. Professor Allo described our project where IFC was the oversight bank that looked at what the group was trying to install in Nigeria. But let's look at our Nigerian banks. Let's look at our Nigerian banks. How many environmental projects are they involved in? How do you get them to realize that EIA, when an EIA goes wrong, it's going to affect their bottom line? That is the crux of the matter. Until we arrive at that nexus, every other thing we are doing is just ancillary. We need to understand the market-based philosophy and psychology of a private investor who is out only to make profit. We need to find a way to develop this nexus between environmental performance, environmental disclosure, and the bank's bottom line. When that reporting begins to become public, that so-so-so bank invested in so-so-so project that has an environmental impact of so-so-so magnitude, then that bank will begin to take notice. And then all the other banks will fall in line. And I think the time has come. NES is well suited at this time to crack its multidisciplinary brain to come up with an understanding and an idea that can work. We can work that through central bank. We can work that through the finance committee in the legislation. We can work that. There are many options available to us. And I think that the time has come to not to go to the market cap in hand, begging them to do what is necessary. For instance, in the stock market in the UK, your credit rating actually provides the value of your stock. Are we doing that in Nigeria? The MTN and so on and so forth that have great impact, the banks that fund these projects, do we have a credit rating that will affect their bottom line when they come to the stock market? And so there are many avenues through which we can force these banks to begin to be responsible and not necessarily to go back to them cap in hand, begging them to develop sustainable programs, train them, and expect them to understand that sustainability is required in their value chain and product line. Thank you very much.
The professors have spoken, from Professor Ezemoye to Professor Allo and to Professor Onweteka. There was one thing common in all the submissions that were made by those people, and I want to wrap it up. Professor Allo identified a gap and said there is need for all the sectors to be financed by the banks, okay? That all projects to be financed by banks, okay? And Professor Law said, how many of these projects are being financed by banks? To ensure better outcome, there is need for, there are some smaller projects that don't need this kind of capital to finance them. And it still contributes to the impact because it's the same environment that they all operate. Thank you so much, dear Prof. I want to say thank you to the three professors that just came back to speak. Dr. Engineer Ibrahim Salau, thank you for also enriching me. I was so pleased and thrilled when I heard you touch on some salient and pertinent issues. You discussed about early commencement of EIA. And that is what we've always been talking about, environmental screening, because you are able to mitigate and design some of the significant impact at the early stage during concept selection study. I will go back and ask some few questions later, and I believe that participants are also bringing in their questions to ask these great panelists today. Thank you so much. I want to recognize Dr. Ebere. Dr. Ebere, please, if you are in the, if you're on this platform, please, can you just speak to us within 2 minutes, please? Dr. Ebere, please, can you just unmute your mic? IT support, do we still have Dr. Ebere, please? Can you just check if Dr. Ebere is still here?
Emily, while we're waiting, can you look through the questions?
Hello? Hello?
Okay, Machi is back.
All right.
Is that Dr. Ebere? Good day, Ebere.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, ma'am. It's a pleasure having you, ma'am. Please, can you just speak to us within 2 minutes? Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much. I much appreciate the opportunity given to me. So my contribution is really on the idea that was brought up by Professor Ezemoe. He made mention of investing in projects like waste management and agroforestry. You know, those things, they will go a long way to, you know, secure our environment, because the issue of waste management is no one's concern. You can see what happened recently in Lagos. So if banks should bring up policies or ideas that can cushion or encourage investors into this very issue of waste management, I think it will go a long way to save our environment. Because as it is now, nobody cares about managing the waste in some of the states. In fact, it's no man's business. They have abandoned it to real estate, whatever, you know, importation of some other products or whatever. You know, they don't care about the end product, end waste that comes out of all these activities. So I'm suggesting that if banks should look into it, those two projects, I think it will go a long way to save our environment. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ebere, for bringing that on board and to remind us that the principle or the philosophy that we have is from cradle to grave approach, and the generator is responsible for the management of the waste. Well, a lot has been talked about on project initiation, implementation, and monitoring, but there is need for us to further monitor in ensuring that the waste that are being generated from our operations are adequately, properly managed in viable manners. Thank you very much, ma'am. I'm glad that I like the quality of contributions here, and I am so pleased that you brought that on board. For the questions, we have a question from the message portal, and I'm happy that Dr. Eugene Itwa is in the house, and he has asked one of the questions I want to ask our great panelists, and to also ask Engineer Ibrahim Salau. So let me give him, let me read out his message, and my introduction was also based on that document. Dr. Eugene Itwa said, the question he sent in is this: there is a circular by CBN to financial institutions on some sectors that must adhere to the EIA principles. Can NES obtain this and follow up on how this can be better implemented? Ma'am, I will call on the President NES to speak, okay? But before I call on her, I would like, sorry, excuse me, please. I would like Engineer Ibrahim Salau to, within just 1 to 2 minutes, just try and respond to this, and then we'll call on Dr. Dorothy Bassi to probably give us the strategy that we can use to ensure this is fully implemented. But we have Engineer Ibrahim Salau, please, to quickly speak on this.
Thank you very much, Emily, for inviting me, and thanks to my friend, Dr. Itra, for asking the question. I guess it was referring to the Nigerian Sustainable Banking Principles circular, which the CBN released in 2012. Yeah, so that is not yet mandatory for the banks in Nigeria. Also, banks are required to comply, and they are complying to varying degrees, but it is not yet mandatory. I agree that there is a big role that NES can play to further help the situation. And that brings me to my second point. I know that the International Finance Corporation, IFC, is working with the CBN and other stakeholders in the financial sector to also help banks to attend to environmental and social issues better. I am part of that project, and without speaking for the IFC, I would explore opportunities between the IFC and NES, working together, and also with the banks to ensure that we achieve better outcomes. I want to completely agree with Professor Wuteka. The summary of his presentation is the internalization of the externalities of banks. Banks consider environmental issues to be externalities with no direct relationship to their bottom lines. But that is fast changing. And this COVID era, it's a very good pointer to the importance of environmental issues. I spoke about this earlier, and that's one of the issues that the IFC project is also looking at, how banks can translate these so-called non-financial risks to their bottom line. Thank you very much. Let me just stop it. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Engineer Ibrahim Salau. Ma'am, Dorothy Bassi, Dr. Dorothy Bassi, can I just have you speak on this maybe within 1 minute, ma'am, if you don't mind, ma'am?
Well, before I speak on that, and I'm not sure I'm the best person to answer directly the question, I would like for us to look at one particular question which came earlier on, and that is to say, are there plans for interactive spatial data infrastructure for different projects in different sectors? This is as a fallout of the mandatory EIA, and also to pay attention to cumulative effects, environmental effects arising from the projects that have been given the go-ahead to execute. So we need to take that on board. But coming back to the banking sector, yes, indeed, environmental issues are really not given the focus it deserves, because environmental impacts take quite a while to manifest. Having said that, Dr. Desmond has told us that we have, and I'm sure we all know that, especially with what has happened in recent times, time is ticking gradually away. We are actually at the precipice of an environmental disaster. And having seen what has happened with COVID, the question now would be, are we getting ready? Are we looking towards a contingency should there be an environmental hazard, an environmental pandemic, or whatever you want to call it? So with all the policies and the various guidelines coming up, all to ensure that our environment is protected and preserved. Yes, indeed, the NES, as the watchdog of the environment, I'm so happy this came up today, so that when they see us, they will not say, waiting concern. We are the watchdog of the environment. We have been recognized by the Federal Ministry of Environment, which is the oversight agency for environmental issues in Nigeria. So we're going to take that up very, very vigorously. We also need the support of our legislators, because they are the body organ that puts forth the laws. But most importantly is to mobilize everybody, which is part of what this webinar series is all about. Each person now is going to inform the next person, because when we get to that critical mass, it will not need an environmental society to do the work. Everybody will come out, everybody will speak up, everybody will be concerned, everybody will embrace, and everybody will fight for what is good for the environment. But thank you very much for that question, Dr. Itwa. You are part of the think tank within the NES, and I can assure all different stakeholders that we're going to take that on board. Because yes, like I said much earlier on, we must develop. We are going to develop. But how are we going to do this? And this is clearly one of the ways we're going to ensure that there is sustainability entrenched in everything that we do. Thank you, Emily.
Thank you so much, Mark.
Emily, can I just add one thing, please?
Okay, yes, please, go ahead, please.
You see, arising from this last discourse between the national president and Salud, it is now very critical for policies declared to also be implemented. Yes. If a policy statement of 2012 is still on the shelf, central bank yet for it to be implemented in 2020 in the banks, it's a problem. These are part of the fallout of this meeting. Yeah. We need to reduce the time gap between policy declarations and policy implementation.
Yeah. Thank you, Doc. Thank you, Prof. Thank you very much for that. Because I said earlier, we have all the laws. I can bet you we have everything in country. So what are we really waiting for? We need to work. We need to really wake up and do what we need to do. Thank you so much, everyone.
Okay. Thank you so much, ma'am. And Prof, I also joined to thank you and to thank everyone. Madam, thank you also for the insight, Dr. Dorothy Bassi. Thank you so much, ma'am. For lack of time, I want to quickly read the message from, I don't know if it's a company, but I just want to quickly go through it. It said, what qualifies a project for an EIA? Foreseen impacts or project costs? I take it again. What qualifies a project for an EIA? Foreseen impacts or project costs? I want somebody to quickly react to that, please.
Emily, I think you can. Emily, I think you can. Join us.
Thank you. Okay, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am, for calling me out. I do appreciate that. Thank you so much. I've been greatly enriched, and I want to say that ideally, since I've been working in this sector, and a colleague of mine asked me that question, and I'm asking again, we've not had cause to say that a project cannot take place because of the identified impacts. Most times, what we try to do is to see how we can mitigate. We're looking forward to a situation just like the EPA that we say, sorry, this project cannot take place. We cannot have you construct this facility because of these communal issues or socio-economic issues. So for us, oil is the mainstay of the economy. If I don't want to sound as an environmentalist, I want to sound as an economist, I would say that most times, ideally, what actually drives project in Nigeria is the economics as part of the system. But should we just rely on that? No.
No.
We try as no, it is not right. And that is why I'm saying today, I've reviewed a lot of environmental studies, and I've seen we have cause to withhold permits or approvals, but we've not gotten to that stage to say that we cannot have the project because of this socio-economic impact. So I think one or two persons can also say something on that, ma. But I believe that for us, ideally, it should be the foreseen impact and not the project cost. You understand? But if you look at the project cost, in this sense that project kind of execution or in terms of what you get following that procedure. So that is the clarity I need, and maybe I will need the support of Engineer Ibrahim Salau here too. Engineer, please, 1 minute. Is it based on the project implementation cost here, or in terms of what you gain as a result of execution?
Emily, before Ibrahim speaks, can I still just ask the question to follow?
Okay. Okay, yes, please. Yes, please.
With the first question of this is, what does the Nigerian law say on the categorization of EIA projects? Which projects does the Nigerian law say must do EIA? Is it based on the foreseen effect or on economics? I can still remember that it's based on the project cost that determines the categorization, what the Federal Ministry of Environment has released. So I think, if I'm not right, Sally cannot buttress that, but I think the costing has been determined the categorization of the various sectorial aspects of Nigeria.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone. Okay. I'll rather, because it's going to be 4 o'clock soon.
Yeah.
I see that Chief Dafinone is making a comment. I
Yes.
rather would like to know his concluding thoughts. And Dr. Majekodumi, I mean, I'm just privileged to be here with them. And I'm really interested in their final thoughts before we close. If there is still time, I can come back to respond. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. We appreciate that. I didn't see that. Emily,
okay,
please.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I just saw the message too. So can we have Chief Dafinone, please? Can you just give us an insight, please, within 1 minute? So I will give opportunity for other panelists to make 1 or 2 comments on this. It's quite sensitive, very, very sensitive.
Good. Thank you very much, Emily. I was actually trying to type the points since I may not have had time. The first, just quickly, is if I put on my second hat as a chartered accountant, is to let the discussants know this afternoon that the international accounting profession is currently examining the use of an environmental scorecard as well as a financial scorecard as part of the annual report of companies. So this would then bring to the fore the need for companies to do the right thing in terms of the environment, since shareholders would now be aware of their performance and the companies would then be rated in line with their environmental scorecard as well as financial scorecard. That's the first point. The second point is on the use of EIAs as a pure paper permit. Now, my belief is that this will continue until there is a financial impact. So there's a need for the different companies to be aware that their products would be categorized according to how sustainably they were produced. So there's currently something called a fair trade certification, which is making the rounds internationally, where products are tagged as fair trade products. And consumers are leaning towards these products once they are aware that they are produced in an environmentally sustainable way. This, using the back end of the market, would then feed through to the producers who would be forced to produce in sustainable ways in order for the demand of their products to be sustained in the long term. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chief, for that professional insight. Thank you so much. That was quite it. We have a couple of questions here, and the questions are just coming in, a lot of them. So I don't know if we have time, but...
Majakodumi's comment, please.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, comment here. Okay, please. Can you... Sorry,
yeah,
sir.
Yeah,
I recognize you, sir. I'm sorry. I apologize, sir.
No problem. I'm right here with you. No problem at all. I'm right here with you. I'm so encouraged with the level of intellect that has been poured into this whole issue. And again, I'm so happy that more emphasis has been brought on, as Dafinone said, the fair trade and the EIA. The EIA, we need to take that as sacrosanct. Just, even if it's just simply to operate your business profitably. Look at how negative the impact of COVID-19 has been on finances, on business, on the banking institutions, on insurance institutions, and so on. Globally, they say it's the worst recession that's hitting us, and we haven't even, come to the peak of it yet. Okay? So this is what can happen when we don't do things right with nature. So definitely, there has to be concerted efforts. We have to demand that EIAs must be rigidly adhered to, and no major project or even medium-scale project can be done, should be done without the EIA. This is a very, very good forum. I'm so happy to hear the deliberations today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Doctor, for that intervention. We truly appreciate you. We still have a couple of questions here. I don't know how we can. We have just 1 minute to go. So can we just conclude? I want the Secretariat at the back end to try and respond to these individuals, because there will be need for them to get feedback on the questions being asked. So because we are almost I just want to say that if I said that the panelists should say maybe say 1 or 2 things, I think we've done that already. So we will just have the vote of thanks. Would that be done by the NES president, or is it to be done by the moderator, ma'am? Please, I see clarification here.
Well, before we miss it, there's going to be available the recording for this webinar, and it should be available for the next 1 week. So should you have missed anything, please feel free to come back and get a recording. Emily, I think you can give the vote of thanks.
I want to thank our great panelists for this great session. Thank you so much for the contributions, interventions that we have. I'm greatly enriched today. I love the quality of contributions that came from the panelists, and I want to congratulate NES for a very beautiful and successful webinar. This is just the first in the series, and I want to announce that we'll be having another one on the 15th. Kindly, just like on the 19th. Mark, ma'am? On the 19th of June 2020, that will be the second in the series. So please, the president has said, you tell somebody